They always say, "Oh, terrorism." What is terrorism? Maybe the actual terrorism is them completely sucking all of the energy out of our money and causing people where they can't even pay their bills. Like that causes real terror in the world. And who are the terrorists? The people who are diluting our money supply. So don't be mad at us because we're just going to a different solution that actually fucking works and we're not being robbed every day. We're the terrorists? No, you guys are the fucking terrorists, and we're just trying to protect our money from you psychopaths.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin block height is 819040, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and many other things as well. Today, that guest is Will Casarin, aka JB55. Will is the creator of Damus, an iOS client for Nostr. It's my favorite way to use Nostr, and it's also the app that jump-started the wider adoption and awareness of Nostr back in December of last year. Will is a great dude whom I've had the pleasure of hanging out with at multiple conferences, and it was great to get him on the show. We covered a ton of topics in our talk, from the events of the past year, like Elon censoring Nostr and the CCP blacklisting it in China, to current and future Nostr developments, zaps and zapvertising, what's next for Damus, regulations, Bitcoin and monetary terrorism, and a whole lot more. If you're not familiar with Nostr, you can check out the show notes where I have a link for you to download the Damus app, as well as a couple of Nostr 101 resources. I'll do a Nostr 101 episode soon, I promise. I've just been slammed between baby preparations, fiat mining, and of course knocking out a bunch of episodes of another fucking Bitcoin podcast. As always, you can watch the video version of this episode on Rumble, YouTube, or X by searching @WalkerAmerica, or listen on Fountain.fm or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for The Bitcoin Podcast. If you listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast on Fountain, consider giving the show a boost or creating a clip of something you found interesting. If you haven't checked out Fountain yet, I highly recommend it. You can send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters and earn Bitcoin just for listening to the show. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Will Casarin. How's it going, man? How have you been?
Pretty good. Just having
You've
a
been
bourbon.
busy? Oh, well, hey, cheers. I've got my Miller Lite.
Cheers.
I've got a bottle of something stronger underneath my desk as well, just in case.
It's always good to have a
should
couple
arise.
bottles under the desk, you know?
It doesn't hurt anything. But man, how was Nostrasia? Carl and I were bummed we couldn't make it, but with baby popping out soon, it was going to be a little difficult.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different vibe from Costa Rica. It's in, the wonderful city of Tokyo, and that was an amazing experience, and getting to meet the actual local Japanese users who use Nostr completely differently from, the way that we use it, which was really fascinating to learn, to see all that and to get ideas on how to kind of optimize our clients.
So different, how so, in terms of their usage?
Yeah, so they actually did a whole presentation on it, which is, so I thought they were actually using a different client, just because you'll notice that sometimes when you're seeing Japanese text, they're not actually replying to anybody.
Right.
And that's actually, but they're all just using Damus and Amethyst. So culturally, it's like, I guess it's kind of rude to like reply directly.
Really?
So they just kind of use it as like a chat room, and they just kind of air reply to each other. Yeah, it's kind of strange, but it's just culturally different, I guess.
Wow. So there is no reply guying or directly adding someone. It's more of just like implied that this is part of the conversation that's going on.
Yeah, and I imagine it's a part of it is because they're a relatively small community. I don't know if that would work like at a larger scale, but for now it's kind of working for them, and they seem to be happy using it that way. So,
dang, that's really cool. I watched a couple of the presentations. I saw Jack and Snowden's, obviously, because I think that was probably one of the most watched ones. But I also caught yours with Miljan and NVK. Enjoyed that one a lot as well, but I've got a backlog of ones I want to go through and check out, because I know Rabble had one that people were saying was really solid and just providing some great kind of context and advice moving forward. Were there any others that you'd be like, you should go and watch these top of the heap?
I really liked Alex Gleason's, because what he's doing is actually pretty important, and then that presentation really makes it clear that how important that is. Um, the idea is that we're not isolated as a decentralized network. In some sense, all the decentralized networks are together, and the minute we start bridging with each other, then it becomes kind of one big network. So he was arguing that Nostr is a part of the Fediverse already, which is interesting.
Interesting.
I think they're part of Nostriverse, but it's all how
Right.
you look at it, I guess, right?
No, that's interesting. I mean, it's kind of a fair point that I guess, well, at least from the top down perspective, like if you're thinking about from regulators' perspectives, looking at, it's going to be centralized media or centralized social media and decentralized social media. Like these are going to automatically get bucketed together by the people that are hopefully not soon, but probably at some point going to start sniffing around a little bit more. I don't know. So that's interesting. It looked like you guys also had a pretty good time there. I saw some videos. There looked like there were some shenanigans to be had.
Well, I didn't know, like, oh my god, like Wiz was really really kind to our stay. He kind of put us up in the Grand Hyatt, and he treated us well, and I got to check out the mempool offices, and but yeah, that's you can go to some pretty degen stuff in Tokyo, so I got to experience some of that.
That's amazing. And do I remember correctly? I mean, do you know some Japanese?
Yeah, I don't that much. Just probably like a few phrases here and there, but it was enough to kind of get me through Japan and talk to some people. But it's hard because not many people speak English in Japan, even though they're supposed to learn it. So if you don't have any Japanese knowledge, it can be kind of difficult to navigate. So yeah, just a little bit, but not too much.
Okay, Carl and I went to Japan for our honeymoon, and I can definitely attest to the little English spoken. But I found people to be like very nice and welcoming, despite there not being much of a language crossover. There were also like plenty of nice people who like we got lost in a couple of train stations there, like in the Tokyo Metro, because it's just huge. And some like very nice guy carrying a baby was like speaking perfect English and like, you look like you don't know where you're going. Can I help you? I was like, that was very kind of you, sir, with your child in tow.
No,
Oh
it's an amazing city. It's like everyone's so polite. People say that they're like rude, but they're not rude. It's just they're actually some of the nicest people like on the planet. Actually, sometimes they get flustered with like dealing with us crazy foreigners all the time. But otherwise it's like such a clean city and everyone's so polite. So yeah, I definitely want to go back.
Oh my God, it blew my mind. I was still smoking cigarettes at the time. And like the fact that it's like, you do not smoke a cigarette walking down the street. Like you want to smoke, you go to the designated smoking area. I pretty much just stopped smoking for that trip. And, because it was like, okay, this is not worth it. So I guess the kind of social pressure there was pretty effective in that regard. But yeah, it's a cool place. It's massive too. What is it? Like 15 million people, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like almost approaching the population of Canada in like a small city. So it's mind blowing, the scale, and what's even more impressive is the fact they keep everything so clean. I think it's a part of the fact that they don't really have anything to. There's not much of a to go culture. You're not like taking food anywhere. No one carries around stuff to like. So there's like no garbage cans anywhere. But yeah, it's very clean.
That was a trip. The lack of garbage cans. I know some of that is because there was a terrorist attack there a while ago where there was, I think it was like sarin gas was put in garbage cans. And so I heard that is one of the reasons why they don't, in addition to just being much tidier than, let's say, probably your average American or Canadian. I can't speak for those of you north of the border, but
no, it's the same.
Yeah. Well, man, it's great to have you on here. We're just going to flow with this. I've got some questions for you just because put the feeler out there that you were coming on. And I know people always have questions for you. I've also got a list of enhancement requests. No, I'm just fucking around. No, I'm absolutely kidding on that.
List them out. Let's go.
No. I have no enhancement requests. Just keep doing whatever you think is best because it's working. But yeah, we'll flow through this and have some fun along the way, I think. And yeah, I'll do just a quick intro and then we'll dive right in. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, but I have a feeling it will be more of a Nostr talk or just a talking talk. But I'm joined today by Damus creator Will Casarin, aka JB55, aka Wild Bill. I decided it sounded like a cool nickname for you. And I know you were Bill Casarin on
Yes.
the App Store for a while now. Now I think it's under Damus. But I remember seeing that. I was like, Bill, okay, well, Wild Bill it is.
Well, my middle name is Robert, so my cousins used to call me Billy Bob. So if you really want to annoy
Oh,
me, you can call me Billy Bob.
wow. Okay, I'm just going to save that one away in my back pocket for later. But you are creator of Damus, which pretty much launched, I think, the more mainstream awareness of Nostr in general. I'm also going to say Nostr throughout. I know you're a Nostr guy, and you definitely know better than me, but I can't change the habit at this point. It's stuck as Nostr in my head. So just a fair warning.
That's fine.
Yeah, but that was we're coming up on like a year now since I joined Nostr. It was early December. That was right around, I remember I joined, you gave me a warm welcome, you and a couple others that were on there. I was using Damus on test flight. I had heard about Nostr maybe 6 months before that, because I was just perusing Fiat Joff's GitHub as one does, and I saw this Nostr thing, and I was like, what is this? And then thought no more of it at the time. I was like, I'm not technical enough to understand what's going on with these things, so whatever. Then saw you post about Damus and that it was on test flight, and I was like, well, that's really neat. Let me try this out. Carl was on there like a few hours later. We were playing around on there, and then a couple days later, it was like Jack was on there kind of and posted about it on Twitter, and things just blew up. That was also right around the time that Elon decided it was a good idea to publicly name Nostr as the list of like no words and no apps that, they were going to block and weren't going to link to, which was just a Streisand effect moment, I think, where people were like, hold on, I've never even, what is this Nostr? Like, I've heard of all these other ones. I've never heard of Nostr. But, maybe I would love to kind of hear how that time was for you. But maybe first we just back up a little bit, because I know you were you worked on Bitcoin. You were a developer on Lightning. You were working with a record label that was selling and utilizing Bitcoin back in maybe 2017, 2018, something like that.
2013, yeah.
Oh my God, 2013. And you I think you heard about Bitcoin for the first time in like 2010. You were, mining on GPUs at that point, which is wild looking back. But maybe we can just start out with, who is Wild Bill Casarin, aka Will? And how did he get here today to now being the creator of Damus, which is the biggest and still pretty much, well, not the only anymore, but still the biggest iOS Nostr client?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just a big nerd, computer nerd, who just likes tinkering with computers and likes tinkering with new tech. I've always kind of been obsessed with, how technology can, bring us into, the Star Trek future. Like that's what I want to be working on. I want to be working on, Dyson spheres and spaceships and stuff. But I feel like before we can get there, we need to like fix our money, right? And fix some of the core things that are broken in our society. Like we can't even speak freely to each other online without like being feared of, being censored. So, I feel like at this one point in time, like I feel like as a software engineer, I can have a huge impact just from like writing some code. And so that's like the most motivating thing that keeps me going every day. It's just this idea where you can make these huge impacts just from writing a bit of code, which is just like crazy to think about, right? Like our ancestors, they were building like skyscrapers and like nuclear and like the Manhattan Project and physical things and like things that are way harder than this. But I'm just like this nobody in my closet, and I can start doing these crazy impacts in the world. So I think that's just it's a really cool time to be a software engineer.
Man, amen. To be fair, our forefathers would look at these crazy lines of computer code and think, what is this like alien witchcraft that these guys are doing?
I would probably be burned at the stake at this point.
Most certainly. You are a heretic who is somehow making magic internet money and doing all sorts of nefarious things. But so that's a great little intro. But now let's fast forward. You'd been working on Nostr for how long before the things really started to blow up? How long were you working on Damus? Did you work on anything else besides that in the Nostr ecosystem?
Yeah, so Nostr was just like a side project, the client I was working on. This was just a hobby. I used to pretty much only work on it on weekends because I had a full-time job at the time working on a startup. And I was mainly working on Lightning because I was working on Core Lightning. I was working a lot on an app called Ellen Link, which was a Core Lightning wallet, which I still use for my zapping. I think I'm the only
Nice.
user of that. Yeah, and I just love the Lightning Network. I loved how it was showing how Bitcoin could actually work as a payment option because I've always been a huge proponent of actually using Bitcoin and not holding it. Some of my best stories is just giving away way too much Bitcoin, and now I'm in pain thinking about how much I give away. But in some sense, it's like, well, but those are the moments I'll remember, and it's like those are all the very important learning moments in my life. So, and the people who receive those Bitcoin are, well, most of them lost the Bitcoin because but I just love the idea of actually using it for its intended purpose because otherwise you're not using this beautiful thing that Satoshi gave us, like this, even like the script interpreter within Bitcoin. It's just this beautiful thing that I've written software for, and so I feel like Lightning Network was like that first time where you can actually use Bitcoin. So I've always been really passionate about it, but I ran into this issue where I realized not many people knew about it, not many people, it was too hard to use. So I was really passionate about just making it easier for people to use Lightning. Yeah, so Nostr was just a side project, and yes, I started in April 2020, yeah, April of last year. So it took and then that December is when Jack found it, and then kind of blew up. But yeah, it was just a side project.
Well, it's amazing what can come of just a side project. It's kind of a beautiful thing. But I still remember one of like Jack's first notes on there was something to the effect of, this is just what Twitter felt like pre 5,000 users, and it was just such a cool thing to see. I don't think I joined Twitter until 2010, maybe. So a couple years behind the early adopters of that. But it was a pretty neat feeling to see all of a sudden you've got Jack Dorsey, who's just like this, legend, and who built this incredibly, incredibly useful platform that, got taken in certain directions that I think he's probably, not as happy about some of the ways that it went. But ultimately, he built something that was so, so valuable. And then for him to provide that signal to say, I see something that is as valuable or more so than the thing I was building, that was just like huge for me, where I was like, wow, this is really amazing. And I'm not a developer. I don't write code. And so I was like, well, at least let me just use the ever loving shit out of this beautiful protocol and try to mess around on it and try to tell people about it. But soon after that initial kind of blow up, it was like, I think was it early January you implemented Zaps? I think you were talking about the spec in late 2022, like late December, and then January it went live. Uh, how long had you been kind of working on that idea for Zaps? Was that coming from the start when because you had all this background on Lightning, you were like, this just makes sense, or did it kind of develop a little as you went along?
Yeah, I didn't think it was possible because I was thinking about it for like the past year, and I just thought like, well, you'd never be able to verify them properly. And that's like, it's still kind of true. You don't really know if a zap is real, and that's why if you have a zapper who's like creating fake zaps, like, yeah, that's possible. But I at least got to a point where I was like, well, if you controlled your own node, you know for sure that the zaps that your node's sending out are true or incorrect. So I thought that was like useful enough for most people. That I was like, you know what, I'll just gonna bite the bullet and write the spec. I thought at one point I might need Bolt 12 to do it, but then I realized like I could probably do it with Ellen Neural. So yeah, it was a long time coming, and it took a long time, but back and forth. I worked with Kieran as well. He refined the spec early on. But yeah, it's once I released it, just to see the explosion of activity around it was insane. Like I think Snort had it implemented, and Amethyst had it implemented, or Snort I think had it implemented before I even had it in Damus, because he just reverse engineered what I had and implemented it. But to see the energy and to see the excitement around it was mind blowing. So
Yeah, I think it was, Nostr was already so interesting to so many people before that, but the addition of Zaps made it something I think that was just naturally attractive for any Bitcoiner, especially one who maybe was a little bit maybe a little hesitant about this, new social media thing,
Yeah.
because that's all they knew about it was, oh, that's just some new social media app, like not having any of the in-depth knowledge of this yet, not maybe realizing the parallels of a decentralized protocol, as is Bitcoin. But as soon as apps come into play, it's like, oh, wait, we can just send Bitcoin to each other. And there's, no one in the middle. Maybe there's a, if you're using a custodial wallet, sure, there's a custodian in the middle handling that Bitcoin. But that was such a powerful thing. And it was a little bit after you implemented Zaps that you also got the news that China had requested kindly that Damus be pulled from the App Store in China. And I still remember that. I mean, do you think it'll ever be back on the App Store in China in some distant future? A, and then B, I don't know, like, how was that as far as just a roller coaster of emotions? Like, you're building this new stuff and it's amazing and people are loving it and people are using it all over the world. And then it's like CCP is basically like, nope, sorry.
Oh my God, you're making me remember all this crazy shit that happened. And like, it was crazy, wasn't it? Like the whole Nostr. Yeah, it started with that Nostr post from Elon. And that's where I think that was the craziest thing. Like to actually see, because there was a lot of craziness going on around that time. And then the CCP thing happened, which was like, what the hell? So you obviously struck a lot of like chords somewhere, and people were paying attention. Whether someone was saying the CCP was like posting on Nostr, like maybe they're doing like counter like,
propaganda of some sort.
They're trying to like flood it with stuff to make it look like it's a CCP operative or something operation. I don't know.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past them. I guess you never know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think people in China are still using it. I get messages every now and then like, oh yeah, I'm still using it. We're using it within the country, so it's pretty cool. And it shows the power of this technology. It's gonna be difficult to stop. Like they're gonna have a hard time stopping it. But it's interesting. There's you mentioned there's a lot of Bitcoiners that joined, and it's interesting. There's still lots of Bitcoiners who are still very skeptical of Nostr, and I'm curious what their mindset is, because it's working. You can get Bitcoins. So like, what's not to like, really? I don't know.
I do see that sometimes still. I saw today that that Stacy Herbert joined Nostr, which is great. She was a little bit of a holdout. It's great to have her part of the flock. I don't know what the hesitation is. I think perhaps, I guess if you're an on-chain maximalist with Bitcoin, you're like, oh, this Lightning isn't even real. Like, I'm not even going to waste my time with it. Maybe that's one thing, but I feel like that's probably a pretty small minority. I think maybe for a lot of people, it's still just, maybe it just still feels so new, and feeling like you're behind the wave, even though it's still, we're still so early, as we say. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
And people keep linking me this Parker Lewis argument, which is like this idea where Nostr is taking away the brain energy from the Bitcoin space. And I just don't see it that way. I just see it as a way to like inject new blood into Bitcoin. So I don't know. It's a weird perspective, but I've heard that a lot as well.
I haven't heard, or I should say, I haven't read that article from Parker. I'll have to check that out. I had Preston Pish on this show as one of my first guests. And one thing he said I thought was super insightful about, because he is like a full Nostr bull, like absolutely loves it. I mean, he's been on since the beginning trying to figure out how to get relays running and just experimenting and having a good time, shit posting, and zapping, of course. But he basically said that he thinks that Nostr is on a level of importance with Bitcoin because free and open communication is on par with free and open money. And he made the point further that without decentralized communication channels, without censorship resistant communication channels, how are you going to actually coordinate the exchange of value between two people across the world and know that, okay, when I'm sending you my address, you're actually receiving my address because I know that I'm sending this to your Nostr keys. So he views Nostr at a more macro level as like, this is the way you're coordinating economically to be able to actually, utilize Bitcoin in its censorship resistant way. You need to be able to communicate between people in a censorship resistant way, which I thought was like, once he said it, I was like, yeah, excellent argument for it. So I don't see that. I don't think I can agree with the brain drain argument, because I view these two things as being kind of developed in tandem and helping to build off each other.
Yeah, and it's not zero sum. It's like we're gonna attract new developers, and those developers might get interested in Bitcoin. No, but that point about like free speech and like speech online is becoming increasingly important, especially during elections in the States, where there's been concern of a lot of censorship and a lot of, propaganda and control of these, big tech corporations to spread, certain message to try to sway the, population to vote a certain way. So we might see Nostr become like actually like an election topic, and people within some administrations actually are talking about it right now, and they've been talking to me as well about like they want to make it a part of their campaign. Is like, look, could be a way to bring like to restore democracy in the United States. So if it went that big and it went into the political sphere, that could be the point where it kind of takes off, which would be really interesting.
I know that RFK, or at least somebody in his team, joined Nostr. Well, it was a number of months ago now. I think it was maybe around the Miami Bitcoin conference. I don't know how active he's been on it since then, but it's also interesting. I mean, if you've seen the stuff Brett Morrison is doing with TrueVote, where he's utilizing Bitcoin and open timestamps and Nostr, I think it's going to be interesting to see. Again, right now, Nostr is being used as a decentralized social media protocol, but obviously it is an open protocol that you can build absolutely anything on. Starting with, social media is an obvious first thing because it's what people want, right? It's something that's going to actually attract users, attract people to use this protocol. But I'm curious kind of what you're most excited about in terms of the next evolutions. I know that you've been really jazzed about kind of email replacements. I think you've been working on one maybe as another side project for a while. But what do you kind of see as like coming next down the pipeline? There's probably still a long way to go on getting massive adoption of the social media side of Nostr. But what do you think comes alongside or comes after that you're really looking forward to, and you think where this protocol is going to really, kind of shine?
Yeah, I mean, so like a lot of the things we use, they're kind of they're all your data is closed behind silos, and you can't really see, you don't have access to it. It's not really transparent. So like this whole idea of like radical transparency with the data is kind of an interesting idea. And so that's why I really like that idea with like the True Vote or whatever that app was, where even like I'm not even sure how 100% works, but even just the fact that you can pull notes from a public database and actually have some transparency around notes, and you can see everyone who signed everything, you can tally everything and make sure like the tally is correct. Like even that simple thing is very, very powerful idea. I think a lot of people lost trust in these systems because they're being counted behind like curtains and you can't see the process, where Nostr radically opens up everything. So that's one thing that's maybe we'll see more of that, this idea of like transparency and how that affects, these types of systems. But also, even just if, the corporate world, I'm really interested in, what if we could, get more of like corporations on, what if we have a suite of tools for like Slack and email and, business related tools that, and that could actually be a good way to make a sustainable and profitable Nostr business. So, what types of like corporate solutions are we building on Nostr is really interesting. Obviously all the other public stuff as well, like Zapstream, the Flockster is really cool. Like, can we replace Meetup because Meetup sucks?
Yeah.
And I guess overall, just like what does it look like when all these apps are working together? What does it mean for a Flockster to talk to your Slack app, or your Flockster to talk to your Damus app, and what happens when you're making highlights? And so I think this greater move toward like really showcasing the interoperability features and how that plays out is really exciting to me as well. So, but yeah, again, we're just so early. We're not even scratching the surface, really.
If you're barely scratching the surface of your Christmas shopping list, and if you're looking for a great gift for friends, family, or yourself, head to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker for 5% off the Bitcoin-only BitBox02 hardware wallet. It's easy as hell to use, Bitcoin-only, fully open source, so you can see the firmware, the app, even x-rays of the hardware and other schematics. Go to their GitHub and verify for yourself. Don't trust me. Hell, build one for yourself if you feel like it. or just go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker for 5% off. It's really up to you. No, it's so true. And I think that's a really interesting point about kind of the, let's say the corporate world, or I mean, even if you think about governments, even maybe it's even something small, maybe it's local municipalities, but just being able to coordinate and communicate in a secure way. And to, imagine if a nation state, maybe the CCP was the first nation state to run a relay, who knows? But I think that we could legitimately see that happening in the not so distant future, where it just makes sense, whether it be for their own internal communication or to perhaps to try and get people onto their relay and be able to see what they're saying, because it is pretty radically transparent. So,
well, it was interesting because I went to this digital sovereignty conference in Spain, and I thought it'd be interesting to go to because it wasn't a standard Bitcoin conference I normally go to, and it was full of like a lot of like EU, like government people, people I wouldn't normally talk to. But it was interesting because I was telling them about Nostr and wow, they're like, we could use this for at the UN. Like I was talking like the IT guy for like some UN organization, and like, this seems like this would be great for like independence from tech corporations. Like that's what we need to be. We need to be neutral. I'm like, yeah, perfect. Like use a relay, like start building this up. He's like, oh, well, we need these clients and stuff. I'm like, we need these types of tools. I'm like, well, these are the things we could be building, even though it's for government, but like, governments are here for now until we turn into like an ANCAP state. We might as well make it, give them proper technology versus whatever closed source systems they're using right now. So,
God, it is just absurd how not only closed source, but just antiquated so many fucking government systems are. Like any time you try to do like literally anything, like the fact that you still need to send physical paper so often for things that are quote official, or the fact that we use social security numbers as basically in the US as basically like our de facto identity. That's like, keep this number safe, otherwise somebody can steal your identity. And this was literally invented like specifically just for social security. And then they later realized, oh wait, we need like a universal identifier for our population. So we've got these social security numbers. Let's just use that. But like the system was never built for that to be the end all be all of identification. And it's just another example of like government basically just, it's like, well, if it's broke, let's not fix it. There's no desire to actually improve or innovate there.
I think my CRA account, which is like the IRS in Canada, it got hacked, okay. I guess. And so I got locked out of my tax account, which is like, this is great. I'm locked out of my tax account. I can't do anything.
Oh yeah, I guess you don't have to pay then, right?
But to like fix it, I had to like fax all my identity and stuff. And I don't have a fax. So I had to use like an app that did faxing, and then like it didn't work. I'm like, this is just, what am I doing faxing in 2023?
Well, Paul Krugman is definitely still faxing in 2023, but for the rest of us, it's like, okay, gonna have to go down to like a local FedEx or USPS and use their fax machine. This is fucking ridiculous. But I don't know. It's the nice thing is, I think that the pace of government innovation is so far behind the private sector, and certainly so far behind the open source community, that it's kind of like this nice barrier. It takes the government so long just to catch on to the fact that something is like, they maybe should pay attention to Nostr. Like it's going to take them a long time, but that's like a good thing. It's like with Bitcoin too. They ignore it, or they don't even know about it for several years. Then they hear about it, and then they ignore it for a while. And then when they finally decide, you know what, we got to do something about this. It's like, well, too late, cat's out of the bag. The genie's not going back in the lamp. Like, it's here now. So that's kind of like I'm grateful to government for being so fucking slow and inefficient, because otherwise we'd be in a lot more trouble, I think. And so one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was on the topic of Zaps, and also on the topic of, let's say, revenue models and general monetization, Zapvertising. And now, this is something you and I have talked about this at some length. As soon as you came out with Zaps, you put out a note that was basically put this idea in my head of Zapvertising, where it's like, well, you could you could just pay for somebody to see your message because you can attach a note to this Zap. And what an interesting thing that would be for companies to use. And I was like, wow, that's fucking brilliant. Recently, we've seen a lot of what people are, I think, calling spam zapping, with like one sat zaps just flooding into their wallet of Satoshi, or, well, now no longer wallet of Satoshi for a lot of US based people. That's a whole different topic. But I'm curious on just kind of your take, because I see both sides of the Zap spam. Like, nobody likes spam, right? Nobody likes getting force-fed advertisements. At the same time, this is like the first sort of spam that you're actually getting paid for, and you're getting paid for in hard money. And yes, it's a very, very, very small, just one sat or two sats, but at least it's still something. I mean, I think the easy answer to that is like message thresholds for the Zap. I think Kaye implemented this already in his Telegram bot. But I'm curious if your thoughts on Zapvertising, on this being perhaps an interesting way to bring in, let's say, more monetary value to the protocol, has evolved at all. And just kind of, if you maybe zooming out, do you have anything in mind for sort of the future of Zaps in general from the user facing perspective? Hopefully Apple allows you to put it back on at some point in the future, but I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, it's interesting because I think we were in Prague and you're about to do a Zapvertising talk, and that's when I added it to the notes. But I'm pretty sure that triggered something within Apple, and that's what eventually led to the note Zaps getting removed. Because I'm pretty sure it was Oslo Freedom Forum was after that. After Prague, I'm pretty sure. And that's when they first announced it. So I think there was something that got triggered within Apple because of that. So it's your fault. Just joking.
Here we go.
No, I just think they like kind of got spooked. They're like, whoa, like an advertising model like doesn't go through. I don't know. There's something that went up the higher. But I think it's still a great idea. I mean, I removed it temporarily because of that, but I'm gonna re-add it because it just makes a lot of sense. It's kind of cool. Some people were complaining about it that, people can just pay for a spot under my thread. So, so maybe there'd be an option to disable it if you're a user, you don't want to see that. But I think it was pretty cool that people could leave messages. In terms of the one Zap messages are kind of annoying. It's like people flinging pennies at you. Like if you're just, it's like, okay, that's nice, but stop. So maybe it's a super easy thing to do the threshold thing. Like you mentioned, you would just, Damus is going to have push notifications soon, so there's going to be an option where you just don't notify me if it's under 20 sats or something, and that's pretty easy to do. So
nice. No, I think that's huge, and I do agree with the flinging pennies analogy, because it's, in my opinion, it's like, okay, you're telling me, like, that's the beauty of Zaps, right? It is a signal about how much value you assign to what you are doing. And how much value assigned to that other person's attention or to their work, if you're just zapping them for the sake of you liked what they noted. But it's probably a good idea for anyone listening, if you're trying to Zapvertise, to at least up the sats like just a little bit. Keep your zapping budget the same, but just decrease the frequency and increase the value a little bit. Because I'm personally I've been with 696 ever since I could, default my Zap amount, and that's felt like a good number for me. It's like, if we're talking in fiat terms, I think like 24 cents now, and this maybe is 25 after today. Who knows?
Yeah, and this is why I set the default to 1,000, because I never intended Zaps to be something you click on every post. It's like if you really like a post, then you should zap it a high amount. I feel like that's more impactful than just getting like 25 sat zaps, right? But I think once we introduce one tap zap, people just decide to like reduce the default amount to like 5, and it's just and zap everything, which is fine. But I don't know if like that is as impactful as it could be, though.
It does kind of, because I love the way you were describing Zaps originally, and still to this day, but it's a value signal, right? And so if you make it so that it is such an insignificant amount that it is no longer, quote, valuable, you've just kind of replicated likes again, but just with a
exactly
really, really tiny micropayment for it.
So this is why we wanted to, and this is why we, at Damus HQ we've been looking at ways to what would incentivize people to actually want to zap higher amounts. Something and ways to get around the whole note zapping issue that Apple does not allow. So one of the things they do allow, which is interesting, is you're allowed to buy physical things with zaps. It's like for some reason I think they made that concession because I'm guessing because Instagram has a physical store where you can sell stuff, and the idea of them taking a 30% tax off of physical purchases on Instagram might have been like way too much or something. So maybe they have this concession for that. So I was thinking maybe, what if you wanted to buy something physical for someone else? The guidelines is not really clear about that, so I'd have to like see if that's allowed. But imagine if you put on a post that you said, "Hey, I'm having lunch right now. It'd be cool if someone bought my lunch. It's like 50,000 sats," and anyone can click that button or maybe do it more than once. So you're buying a physical purchase for them. Maybe that's considered a note zap. I don't know, but I was trying to think of loopholes to get around it.
No, I think that makes sense. It's also such a, like, it's one of those things. It's like, this is just a stupid rule. Like this just doesn't actually make any logical sense. Like because LN URL invoices or just Lightning invoices, regular ones, are just strings of characters. It's like you can just post them anywhere and anyone can pay them. And you can do this literally on any social media platform. Nostr aside, you can do it on Facebook and you can do it on Twitter and you can do it on Instagram and anything. And it's like, to draw this line at, no, you can't do it at the post specific level, just seems so like obtuse to me.
They specifically have an issue when it's a button. Like, you can post a Lightning invoice on Twitter and someone could pay it. But for some reason, if you turn that invoice into a button, that's not allowed. Like technically, I don't think invoices are allowed. And Damus has this right now, Bolt 11 invoices that converts into a button. I don't think that's allowed because it's like a button you press to buy something. But they haven't really caught that, I guess.
I just don't what could possibly make the fact that something is a button? Like, does it make it too easy? So is that their justification for it?
So the guideline says, I forget the exact wording, but it's something along the lines of, if you encourage people if you make it easy if that transaction ever ends up being a sale of some type, if it ends up encouraging sales of things. So imagine if you did a post that was like, I'm selling these shoes, or I'm selling this like JPEG, send me 50,000 sats, and the person who sends me 50,000 sats, then I'll send them the JPEG. So that's like technically not allowed because anyway. So I don't know. Just having the zap button there apparently isn't encouraging people to do those things, but you can do those things anyway. So it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, right. And it's like the fact that they're okay with the transaction of physical goods,
right?
If there's a physical good involved, but it's like, as soon as it's a digital or virtual good, that's where they draw the line. Again, just seems like,
I think
ridiculous.
They're just trying to protect that huge revenue stream of 30% on digital purchases, and anything that encroaches on that, they're gonna try to stop. So they don't even have to follow their own guidelines, right? They can change the guideline, right, if it doesn't match what they want to do. So,
I mean, that's kind of that's the bitch of working with these app stores. I know that the EU, I believe it was passed, but didn't they just put something through that Apple's going to have to allow alternate app stores? That went through recently, didn't it?
Yeah. So it all comes down to, are people going to use this distribution method? Are people going to go download this? And like, how does notifications work on sideloaded apps? Because like, if you think about it, a lot of their app security relies on, App Store review. So if it's not on the App Store, will like basic functionality work? Like probably not. Like, so will people even want to use them? So whether they're allowed or not, I don't think it's going to be a huge impact.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is where like PWAs are pretty useful for a lot of this. I mean, I guess I think you can use Iris and Snort as click add to home screen and put it on there. I haven't done that with Iris or Snort, but so I assume that it still works okay.
The main issue with that is that, so extensions don't work, plugins don't work, Safari plugins don't work with PWAs. So if you want to use a Nostr app as a PWA, you can't use the plugins that protect your private key. On iOS we have an extension called Nostr, and it's a plugin for Safari on mobile and allows you to hide your private key from the web apps. You can't use that with PWAs. So and that's going to be the theme with with Apple, is that if it's too easy to get around the App Store, they're going to just start gimping PWA so that you can't even, that just no extensions is one example of that. So it's not like a perfect solution.
No, I mean, that's a fair point. I would like, because we're talking about Apple loving those sweet revenue streams of 30%. I'd like to shift a little bit to revenue streams of another manner, and that is with regard to relays and incentive models.
Oh, I thought you're going to start talking about Footster.
You know what? Just for you, I wore.
Oh yes, let's go.
A Footster.com shirt. I haven't updated the website in a while. I got to get to that. But yeah, for anyone listening, Footster.com, go there and see some feet, and then go on Nostr and post your feet.
Zap some feet.
It will usher in the next bull run.
Absolutely.
I'm just sure of it. But Footster aside, we can circle back to that. One of the topics that I think was really prevalent at Nostrica, and I'm curious if it was at Nostrasia as well, was monetization and just sustainable business models for relay operators and for client developers. Because obviously a lot of people have been doing a lot of this just kind of out of the goodness of their heart so far. But, electricity costs money, and hardware costs money, and upkeep costs money, and your time is also very valuable. So, I mean, maybe it's best to start on the client side. And you obviously run a huge beefy relay for Damus, which is sure just a quite an endeavor to do by itself. But then you've also got Damus the client. And I'm curious if you've thought more about, I know in the past you've talked about kind of a Damus Purple, or whatever you might call it, that's basically like a paid version that you look at as, kind of like, okay, maybe you get some additional features, but also it's a way to, you built something really valuable. People find it valuable, and I think want to give value back. Have you thought of any other alternate models? Are you still leaning towards the kind of enhanced Damus Purple version as the best bet, or where's your thinking at on that now?
Yeah, I mean, the value for value model was looking extremely promising, especially if I just knew if we scaled up the amount of users that, and note zapping would have took us to a place where it would have been fine monetization wise, but obviously Apple axed that. So now, we've been forced to look more at the traditional models like subscriptions and Damus Purple. So just, I think 2 days ago, I started working on some premium features for Damus Purple. We're going to try it. I don't think Nostr is big enough that where it's going to make a huge impact. It's fine if you just want to like pay for your servers, but if you're trying to take over the world, people want Damus Android, that takes resources. We ended up hiring someone.
Yeah.
So fortunately, we were able to get the OpenSats grant for Damus iOS for $150K, awesome, which is pretty good. And so that's paying. We're using that to pay an employee to like work on that. Daniel, he's really good. But what about Android, right? So I'm currently not being paid, so now I'm kind of just like, well, let's see if I can get another grant for Android, but it's like, oh no, maybe I already have one grant, so they're not really willing to do that right now. So it comes down to, it's like, well, you can only get so far with grants, so, what do we do? We have a merch store, and that's not really bringing in that much money. So what about subscriptions? We calculated it, and it's like, well, even if we get a decent number, it's probably not going to be enough to even just pay for another employee. So it all comes down to, it's like, what do we want to do? Do we want to scale this up? And then at that point, you need to think about, are you going to do VC funding? Which has always been something that Jack personally has told me, don't do it. But I'm like, Jack, well, it's easy for you to say, you made billions of dollars of VC funding. So I'm kind of struggling with that right now. And maybe I'll probably have another call with Jack. I'm what year? It's been a year. What should we keep doing this route, or what's your idea? But it's been a really big challenge for me, just trying to figure out. I've had much more respect for running a business now, because it's a lot harder than it seems, and especially in this new space where no one's really making any money, right? So it's definitely challenging.
No, and I mean, it's difficult too, because these are truly kind of uncharted waters, and especially I think when you're building out in the open, it makes a lot of things more simple, but it certainly adds a layer of complexity. I think maybe there's sometimes this a feeling by some that, well, this is open source, so I'm just gonna, I don't need to pay anything for this, and nobody deserves my precious bitcoins. But I think that there is an appetite. I'm looking forward to the premium features because I know I will be happy to sign up for that. Can you give us any of a sneak peek taste of what some of the, just where your things, I don't want to spoil anything, but the general direction that you're thinking for some of the premium stuff?
Yeah, I really like the translation thing within Damus, the universal translator, but the biggest issue is the UX is just terrible. Like if I want to get, probably the best translator is Nostr.wine, translate.nostr.wine. But you have to like fumble with API keys, and like when you reinstall Damus, it's like you lose your API key, and it's just like a pain in the ass. So I figure like an obvious one is just provide that as a premium feature. It's like you just get translations, they're turned on. So that was an obvious thing. So I implemented that 2 days ago, and that's ready to go. I really want to do a thing where if you're like the first person to subscribe, like I'm gonna have like numbers on the account. So if you're like one of the first, you can say I'm number one. I was the first subscriber,
Ooh.
and maybe you could show that off on your account. And this is gonna lead down to more what I really want to do, and I think that's probably the best bet for making money on this protocol is just really cool, perks that you can add to and flair you can add to your profile, right? Maybe there's a limited time thing where it's like this month there's like a special feature you can make your profile look like golden or something, and if it's only available for this month and you can buy it and to support Damus, and just make like these pay. I mean, this model has been used by video games, and like I think Counter-Strike is like a good example where you can buy skins. It's like $1 billion game at this point just from the market. So I don't know. It's just that I'm gonna try that just because I got to try everything. But
Absolutely,
in terms of premium features, I definitely want to add more multi-account. And maybe I won't even make multi-account premium, but yeah, I'll have to think about it. I'm still working on it.
No, honestly, I think multi-account is something that, at least I know, switching between my Walker account, my Footster account, and my Stop the Presses account, I would definitely pay for a premium feature like that. I think the skins are an interesting one too, because Carl and I just started playing Diablo 4. Had never played it before. We were very deep in Baldur's Gate 3 before that.
I love Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, wow, what a game. We actually started our second playthrough of it. Then we were like, maybe we should try out Diablo. And there was a Black Friday deal on it. So awesome.
You guys went all the way to Act 3?
We went all the way to Act 4.
It was in Act 4? Oh, I'm talking about Baldur's Gate.
Oh, no. Baldur's Gate. Yeah, no, we played all the way through.
So
but
good.
It has amazing couch co-play, which is fantastic. Because like usually when we game, it's like one of us is playing, if we're playing like The Witcher or like one of the newer Zelda games, it's just always single player. So finally being able to do a side by side, it was like, yes, this is amazing. We can do it on Diablo 2. How could you have known? Is it too predictable?
Yeah.
I mean, I like a little hack and slash. What can I say? It's fun. But I was blown away because I saw the whole just all of the different skins and like the fact that you can buy all of that, these platinum coins for their in-game currency to upgrade these various skins. And depending on the season that it's in, you can get these different upgrades. And I'd read about some of it in one of, I think it was actually one of Dirt Gigi's pieces where he wrote about how players within, I think it was maybe Diablo 2, basically switched to using a different type of, emergent, basically in-game currency because the coins that were provided, like the gold in-game was not very useful. Right. But I digress. The point being, it blows my mind. People will pay, like for these video games, a lot of money for these cosmetic upgrades that often are maybe only lasting for a season. And so
I think the core of it is like you're doing something that you're really passionate about. You love the game.
Yep.
You're with people who also love the game. And, it's just a way to kind of show off, like, I look cool, or like, but like how that's not that different from a social network. Like video games are social networks in some sense. So if you kind of like show off player, like, oh, like I'm being funny. I have this funny clown profile this month, or like just like something that's, it's just, I don't know. So things like that, I think could actually be a big thing in Nostr, but who knows? It's still early. So
no, honestly, I think so too. And that was kind of what I was getting to, is that like, I would find that honestly more attractive in a social network than I would in game. But granted, maybe I just haven't gotten deep into Diablo enough yet. Maybe I'll change my tune. Maybe I'm biased towards Nostr, but I think that that's a good place to start with it. I mean, people like to have fun too. Like keep Nostr fun, keep it weird, give people options to, express themselves however they should choose. Maybe it's a an animation of cascading feet. I don't know, just off the top of my head.
I'm gonna have to add that now that you gave me that idea. That'll be a special feature where you can like send feet to people and it'll like rain down on their screen.
I think it's a pretty nice idea. Well, another thing in terms of, so that's kind of the client side. In terms of the relay operator side, because I think this is something where, like, this is what I heard, I think probably most frequently alongside the client monetization was relay monetization. Like, what can we do for this? There's a lot of paid relays now, obviously, which is fantastic. I think people are happy to pay for that. They're happy to pay for something that's a little bit improved performance. Do you think that there are other models that, like, what do you think about content specific relays? Like, as in a relay that is just, again, let's just off the top of our heads use the example of feet, because it's just sitting right there. But this is a Footster relay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's a good opportunity there, whether it's feet, maybe it's just an Instagram style relay, maybe it's a TikTok style relay that's only allowing short videos? I saw that I think was it you or was it Pablo that just published something about 140 character limit relay that filters out? It was Pablo. You guys are both building so much constantly. Sometimes I get it mixed up, but I think that's really cool. So, like, do you think that that's a good model for relay operators to try and find their niche and then to say, okay, if you want this niche, that is something that you can pay as a premium offering to say, I value the content that this relay provides and curates for me. Is that something that's sustainable as it scales, or is that just kind of a nice to have?
Yeah, I mean, like, do we pay, website operators for running websites? Like, do we pay Bitcoin nodes for running a Bitcoin node? I don't think there's this idea of like paying relays. I don't know even if it even makes sense, because relays are actually pretty cheap to run. Like, I run mine, and it's not that much money. And if it gets too big, I just wipe it and start over. Like I did that recently with my relay. So I think this idea where relays, every relay needs to be making money is kind of silly. And like, imagine if the web, if that was like your vision of the web, where it's like every website need to be making money to stay online. Maybe if you're like a big relay that's like hosting lots of content, then maybe want to find clever ways to monetize it. But we're moving to a more decentralized model in Nostr, where you can run your small relay that only hosts your stuff, and clients can still find your content. And maybe that's just running on a Raspberry Pi, and monetization is not important. So I think, yeah, that's kind of like the thinking I'm moving toward recently, is that maybe it's not as important that people are talking about.
I hadn't thought about it from kind of the web perspective before, but that makes a ton of sense. Like, if every relay has to always be making money, that's not as scalable. And
because it's pretty cheap.
Maybe
it's pretty cheap to run a relay.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's expensive for my relay because it's like the biggest relay.
Because your relay's
but
massive.
Most relays are not that big, and to run it, you probably cost like $20 a month. Like, it's not a big deal. So,
okay. No, I think that's a good perspective, and perhaps people's thinking is going to evolve around that as we go forward. But back to content specific relays, do you think that that's something that is widely desired, or do you think, let's say, maybe this is kind of goes down the algorithmic front? Because I know you are not anti-algorithm. You are a chronological feed maximalist, so to speak, but you're not anti-algorithm. No. And I think for me, and I'm guessing for you and for a lot of people, I think the most important thing is just the ability to opt into something or opt out, just as long as you have a choice for how you see it. So how do you kind of see I think I heard in your Nostrasia talk, you said you think next year is going to be basically the year of the algorithms on Nostr. What do you envision that looking like? Are you still going to always be a chronological feed maximalist, or is there like an in case you missed it feed? Like, I know Jax talked about that as one of the things that early Twitter did really well, was like, you've been off for a little while. Here's what you missed when you come back.
Like, I'll be an algorithm maxi when I've programmed my own AI that it knows me so well, and it picks stuff that it finds interesting for me. Like, that would be really awesome. It doesn't exist yet, but the important thing is that we set up our clients and our systems so that I can just plug in that AI bot when it's ready, and it can start feeding me the algorithm. But the important thing is that it's my choice, and then I get to choose. And it's the same idea. It's the same arguments around moderation as well. That was one of the big things that when I went to this conference in Spain. They're worried about like, oh, what about like misinformation and disinformation? Well, it's like, no, like those are only like the bigger concern is that, you have one person deciding what's true and what's not true. So the market again solves all these problems. If we have a market of algorithms, if we have a market of trust and safety teams, then you can pick and choose what you think is like appropriate level of moderation or the appropriate algorithm. The centralization part of it is what causes the negative effects of algorithms and moderation. Not to say those things are bad on their own. It's just the centralization aspect of it. So yeah, I feel like Nostr is going to be really going to have the best moderation. It's going to have the best algorithms because it's set up the right way. So
I think that that's honestly a phenomenal point. Just that the the problem isn't moderation itself; it's the centralization of
yeah,
it. Because as things centralize, that means a smaller and smaller group of people get to decide what is quote
yeah,
best for everyone else. And invariably, one person's utopia is another person's dystopia. Like that's just how it works. And so the ability to have choice, I think, is just freedom of choice is so important there. Another thing I wanted to touch on was I saw Jack talking the other day. I think he was quote noting Rabble with regard to what's it going to really take to grow Nostr. Um, and he was talking about search. And I saw in true Nostr style, like a little while, I think it was maybe earlier today, where you posted like, okay, so I've been working on coding up this plain full text search engine for the past 8 hours. It's almost ready. First of all, just such a classic Nostr moment.
this always tends to happen. Like I'm out
Some
at a restaurant, like having a nice dinner with like my family, and like and then the bat sign goes up. It's like Jack needs something, and like and Vanessa's like, Will, you got to fix this. I'm like, fuck, fine, I'll do it. I like pull out my laptop, I write some code, and like 8 hours later, it's like, all right, I got something working. But that just goes to show, is I actually do like respect Jack's, he has his knowledge and his wisdom from his past, building Twitter. It's like I respect that, and like I think he's right. Like I think search would be amazing if we have. Imagine if Nostr was a much better information like searching device where you can just like put all your notes in one place, and like search them efficiently, and like it becomes way more powerful. And so yeah, I think he's right, and I think that's why it's almost done. I just did the rest of it today mostly, so I'm excited to have it in Damus hopefully soon. So
honestly, that's awesome. And then the idea of kind of layering in value over the top of that, where even with things like highlighter.com that Pablo built out, where you're then assigning value to specific notes or to parts of notes, with zaps in general to the whole note, but with highlighter to parts of long form notes, that creates a really interesting layer on top of search where you have the potential to really make a value-based search algorithm, which is kind of interesting. Granted, there are ways that you can, of course, as we talked about earlier, maybe game that with what would you call it, wash sapping or something. But in general, I think that there's so much more potential there to actually deliver higher quality information and a better search experience. Do you anticipate is the search engine going to be built within Damus, or do you think this is going to be something separate?
yeah, so this search is specifically so because as a Damus person, I'm like a client maxi, so it's like everything. Whenever I see like some centralized service like Primal or something or some search relay, I'm like, fuck, I can do that within Damus. I'm going to do this. I want all of those features to be on your phone, and because why not? Like we have the technology to do that. So obviously, it's not going to have a full view of the entire network. I can't store the entire search index for all of Nostr on your phone, but when you're receiving notes and when you're receiving stuff, you're going to be building a local index of stuff you've seen. Whether you go to someone's profile page, you don't scroll all the way down. There's still notes down there you might not have seen. So your phone will know about it. So when you do a search, it's going to try to search your local notes. If it can't find anything, then maybe it'll hit a remote search relay to search for the rest of the wider network. So yeah, search is going to get a lot better very, very soon, which is exciting.
Honestly, that's awesome because I feel like it's there's I've only been on this protocol for just shy of a year now, and already I've bookmarked a lot of stuff. Like that was a really nice feature to be able to use. but there's so many things where I'm just like, oh, I remember, so, somebody said this like months ago, and I'm trying to find it, and it's like trying to scroll, and it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
And so I think that's I think search is just a big part of discovery in general. Like when you have a more advanced searching method, it makes discovery a little bit easier. I know on Damus now, for some time now, there's been the ability to follow hashtags, which I think is really nice for people who are just getting started. And when I was switching between accounts, maybe it was like a month ago or so, I saw that I saw the onboarding experience again for the first time in a while, and it looks great. Like I still remember the first time I onboarded to Damus, but now it's like it's very nice. I think you give some here's some hashtags that people typically follow. Here's some accounts that fall into each of these categories. Are you guys building that out some more? Do you think that kind of onboarding process is an area just across Nostr, across different clients that can be improved upon a lot? Or what do you think is kind of is that a big part of hashtag grow Nostr, or is it more about the external outreach?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we built all that stuff is it's the number one thing that people complain about is when we get feedback from users, and it's the number one thing was like when we watch users use Damus, like they'll open up, they'll create an account, and then they'll just not follow anyone, and they'll just like they'll leave, and they're like, what is this?
There's nothing here.
It follows the Damus account by default. I've actually finally removed following me because like people are like, what the fuck is this like crazy guy with like laser eyes in my feed? That's all I see when I first join. So I think that was good feedback from Jack. He's like, you need to not auto follow you. I'm like, okay, that's probably true. I'm kind of crazy. So that was helpful for onboarding. But then it's just like, yeah, having like recommended, people to follow is kind of important. I think I lose perspective of that. I'm biased because I've had my account already and I have all my followers. I don't really care about onboarding, but it's a struggle for a lot of people. And I sometimes I need to remind myself to like logging out and create a new account to see how bad it is, that experience. Another thing we want to do, which would be kind of cool, is imagine if you wanted to onboard your friend and like the types of accounts they would like to follow. So you would create this code where if you sign up with Damus and you enter this code, then you'll have your account set up with people already automatically followed. So we're looking at that as well as like an onboarding thing. So yeah, we think it's pretty important for just getting people to this overall idea of retention, which is something we've been focusing on a lot more at Damus. So that's why we're doing push notifications, onboarding, because people are just coming and leaving, and that's not going to work. So
I think it's such a tricky thing too, because I mean, it's much like with an experience using Bitcoin. If somebody has a difficult, even just like marginally difficult or not optimal initial experience, it can just be the only thing that sticks in their head for maybe years afterwards, where they're like, I tried this Bitcoin thing, or I tried Nostr, and it just didn't, it just comes down to like, it didn't work.
Yeah.
It just didn't work. And to make it as foolproof as possible, where it's like, when you're coming in, you don't have to make too many decisions, because as you get to a broader and broader user base, it's like, okay, you need to, oh, well, hello there, little furball.
Hello, this is Penny.
Well, hello there, Penny. Does she have an account?
Not yet. Should we set up an account for you?
I think there's a pretty big Catster community. I don't have a cat, but I do see a good amount of Catster posts.
Sorry, we lost the train of thought thing, I think.
Oh no, that's okay. Well, you know what? That's the beauty of these free roaming discussions, because I did actually. There was one other thing on the topic of onboarding and just new folks in general. Who do you think is going to be the next wave of Nostriches, the next wave of Nostr adopters? And perhaps a better way to frame it would be, who do you think the next like community of people is that's going to get censored by whatever platform they're using right now? Like, we had a pretty big influx of Redditors recently. And I think that much like Bitcoin, a lot of people will come to Nostr because their hand is forced a little bit. They're not going to necessarily seek it out when everything's working fine on their centralized platform. But once they start to feel the pain a little bit, once they realized, oh, okay, I can be censored, or I'm not seeing what I would like to be seeing because somebody else is controlling the information flow, that forces people to get smart, and to figure out, okay, what alternatives are out there. So do you have a feeling for maybe it's going to be a lot of folks in the media sphere who realize, what, I need to have a way to do censorship resistant publishing and have, and maybe they're running their own relay just to be able to have their own backlog of information they put out. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, what we've been seeing is that every now and then, like a country will just like come online. Like with like Thailand was just a thing, like CM hashtag CMster, all of a sudden like a large geographical area just like came on board, usually from a viral, TikTok video from some influencer in Thailand. And that's enough to kind of just bring large groups of people. And one way we've been supporting that at Damus is that we'll notice this and they'll start creating their own like geographical relays within that area. So now we have a feature in Damus where if you have that region set on your phone, it'll automatically add those bootstrap relays. So again, going toward this idea of engagement, like you're more likely to be, you want to interact with people who are speaking that language. So it makes sense to have that in your bootstrap relay list. So that's just one thing we've noticed. Obviously North America is actually one of the biggest users of Nostr right now. So maybe, get more North American users, but I don't, maybe that's not going to be the biggest thing. Maybe it's going to be the rest of the world and North America catches up, but I don't know. We'll see.
It's kind of interesting, the idea of countries turning on like en masse. Yeah. And that you're probably right. It probably is from like a couple of influencer TikToks where people just all of a sudden get a bug in their ear and say, oh, I should check this out. On the topic of TikTok, I know something that, people have talked about is, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but a TikTok style experience. Now, I think the TikTok algorithm is pretty toxic in general because it really is brilliantly designed to keep people hooked, to keep their attention, to keep them just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling endlessly, but done in a different way where there is the option to, choose your own adventure,
right?
Let's say, to choose your own algorithmic path. That's clearly TikTok tapped into something that people really like. I mean, every other social media platform basically copied that model. So do you think we'll see a Nostr client spring up that is, maybe based on how their relays are filtering and how that client chooses to surface the events, that it'll be basically that experience mimicked?
I think the TikTok algorithm is probably one of the best algorithms I've ever seen, because I notice it pushes me out of my bubble every now and then, and it puts me into somewhere crazy. Like it put me into like, I was like outdoor cooking or something, and I'm like, I would have never normally scrolled for that stuff, and now I'm like outdoor cooking maxi. So I do like, I think that what they're actually doing something interesting with their algorithm is trying to like at least push people out of their bubbles. So I that's not one thing I like about the TikTok algorithm, but yeah, sometimes it's just like, oh, it's just mindless scrolling. It's so bad. And a lot of people they fault Nostr for that. It's like they open up Damus and they expect an experience like that. They want to just not follow anyone and scroll. But I get it. It's like, they're busy and they don't want to spend all their time and invest their time into this app and trying to figure it out and try to follow people who they might be interested in. They don't. That's like way too many decisions to make for the most people. They just want to scroll and be shown, because like in theory, like it's not hard to figure out like what people are interested in just from gathering data on what they're looking at. Like what TikTok does is they'll look at if you're watching a video for a certain amount of time, and if it's just the videos that you watch the longest just happens to be the ones that they think you like the most, and it actually works pretty well. So, but that just requires them to collect a lot of data on you, and they build a really interesting and like a very personally invasive profile on you. So maybe we can start doing that client side. I'm kind of hopeful for maybe we can start doing this stuff with like privacy preserving ways of doing it. I don't know, but we'll see. But yeah, again, next year the algorithm, people should start playing with these ideas and start building. So,
well, and I think obviously there are good and bad ways to surface people an experience that they like, and collecting a shitload of personal data and building this massive profile of this person and how long they spend on each video, and maybe they're even eyeball tracking, I don't know. that's a pretty fucking invasive way. But I think one of the opportunities with Nostr is that, okay, building from an opt-in perspective from the beginning gives you the opportunity to say, okay, like, what are you into? Like, what do you want to see more of? Like, I think and again, maybe, one of the beauties or, well, beautifully terrible things about TikTok is that you don't have to do anything, right? Like, you're just opening it up and it's all just served to you there from the moment you have the app downloaded. You don't need to follow anyone. It's just there. And you're just at the feeding trough, drinking in all that sweet info sludge. But I think, I perhaps I'm overly optimistic, but I hope that people have slightly more patience to be able to say, okay, let me at least take 10 seconds to say I'm into this and this and this and this. And that starts to build my experience. Because I think one of the beautiful things that actually shocks people in a really good way about Nostr is when they see a client like Damus and they look on the App Store and they see no information is collected about me. Like, that's truly unheard of. Like, I cannot think of another app that does that. Maybe you can, I don't know, but it's truly unheard of because everyone sells your information this day and age. Our United States Postal Service is allowed to sell your information. Like, anytime you sign up for something new through our USPS service, you will guaranteed get a flood of new robocalls within the next day and robo emails. It's just like a fact. And I just think that that's so genuinely fucked that our information is just thought of in this commoditized way. And that's one of the things that I love so much about Nostr is that you're not this product anymore. It's not the freemium model where, if you're not paying for it, you are the product. No, it's, granted, you're not paying for it on Nostr either, but at least you can see that they're not, nobody's collecting things on you.
I mean, I've only kind of like worked at startups my entire life. And one of the things that's so common, it's just like a natural thing. It's like, oh, you just turn on the analytics. So there's even a website where I think it was called segment.io, where they just streamline the whole process. Where you don't turn on one analytics. You can just select all the analytics you want and then press one button and it gets added to your website. And the thing that changed it for me is when, I was going through all these analytics and I found one. It was like this mouse tracking one, where if you could open up and you can see where they moved their mouse on the page, like where they were like, and it was like, this is just so creepy. It was just like the creepiest, like it felt like I was like a voyeur, like looking in on your family dinner. Like, it was just disturbing. Like, I'm like, I was like, at that point I realized it's like, do we even need this? Like, we weren't even using it. It's just we collecting all this data and this personal information for what? Like, are we going to make business decisions based on this? Like, no, it's just like, so I just, after that moment, I'm like, I just became an anti-analytics max. I just felt like it's unnecessary. You can make business decisions without it. It's not that important. So I don't think it's necessary.
The mouse tracking is such just like a unnecessarily creepy one too. It's like, I think eyeball tracking is probably like the pinnacle of creepiness. And I mean, obviously there, a lot of things are supposed to protect you from that, but I'm sure it is probably done more than we know. I don't know. It's a sad thing that, and maybe Nostr is the chance at fixing this a little bit, but the incentive model is just so broken on these platforms. And honestly, for a lot of businesses in general, the incentive model is broken, but particularly for social media, any sort of news media as well. Like, you just see even Twitter's advertising model change, where they're now paying, out a small sum for the vast majority of people, but they're paying out something to people for how many impressions they're getting, how many verified impressions they're getting, I should say. And okay, that's nice. But at the same time, I've noticed that you see so much more, like, if this is even possible on Twitter, even more just overtly inflammatory but at the same time, it's like people are making these really inflammatory statements or questions, but they're so mundane and predictable because people just know, like, oh, this is what gets engagement. And I'm going to do this because when I get more engagement, I get more money. And it's such a sad thing to see that. But at the same time, it's like, well, that's the world that we're playing in the centralized playground. I don't know. It's a bummer to see because the quality of information that you see is then degraded because of the broken model.
this is why I'm like such a believer in
I don't know.
the value for value. It's like it feels like it fixes a lot of these corrupting issues. Even just with the advertising, that model in the sense that you're gonna say whatever you want that you got to say to make the money, and it's and it's in some sense it's just corrupting what you actually want to say, right? Why can't you just say what you want to say and get paid by people who want to hear what you want to say? So it should be that simple, but unfortunately, like we everyone's just relying on the ad model, and no one's really explored any other way because that's just where all the money is, right? Maybe that'll never change, but it is kind of a sad state of affairs.
No, it's so true. Like you're essentially self-censoring because you believe that what your new behavior is going to accrue you a slightly larger chunk of an already pretty small
Yeah.
pie. Like unless you're one of the accounts on X that has literally hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, like it's like, is that $10 a month really worth the degraded information that you're putting out there? Probably not.
Yeah.
But it's sad. I mean, that's why I'm still honestly very hopeful about value for value enabled through Nostr, and honestly for Zapvertising in general, because I think that is a chance to incentivize better behavior, because it's like when you cut out the middlemen and you're delivering more of that value or all of that value straight to the intended recipient, I think that just naturally starts to align incentives. It creates a more pure free market for good, high value information. And there's always going to be ways this can be gamed. If we think about it as well, just something I've heard Sailor talk about, because he's talked about Nostr quite a lot. And one thing he brings up as just something that, needs to be thought about is just the propagation of AI bots on Nostr. Like in these coming years, I think it's not just going to be a problem for Nostr. I think it's going to be a problem for all platforms. Yeah. Like Twitter, even though they're apparently, verifying everyone and their grandmother, they still can't figure out their damn bot problem. Like it's just absurd.
Yeah, I mean, I see the blue checks on Twitter. It's like,
what are your thoughts on that for
blue
Nostr?
checks on Twitter? It's like they're still all bots. So is it even working?
No, it's truly not. The amount of times I will see my wife, Carla Bitcoin, but it's like Carla Bitcoiny, will retweet something of mine. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I thought Carla already retweeted that. And then I look and it's like Carla Bitcoin is a handle, but with like Stefan Livera's PFP still, because this scammer is in the process of like smolting between one of their impersonations and another. And it's like, I don't see how that's so hard to fix, like with just like a couple of if then statements, but apparently it really is. And I'm probably oversimplifying, but it seems like there's some pretty simple checks you could put in place. And then it makes you think they don't want to fix it because their engagement numbers are going to go way down across the board.
Right. I'm really excited. I want more spammers to come to Nostr, because then it's like, then we'll start working on solutions. Like the spam is kind of weak on Nostr. I'm like, come on, you guys can do way better.
It is. There's like one like optimism bot or something that's like it's always out there that I meet.
Like, oh, okay, well,
it's cute. Like you're really
you're
trying
muted,
out
but, like,
there.
you can keep trying.
Right,
it's fine.
Right. Well, that's an interesting point, that it's not really a problem yet that needs to be fixed. But do you see the ability for in the next couple of years, like people are going to be using various various programs that are going to get more sophisticated to spin up innumerable bots that behave more and more like actual users. Do you think that Nostr's Zap model is actually a way to kind of guard against a little bit of that? Because you still, when you attach a value to spam, the spam becomes more and more difficult to operate at scale. Like even if, 5 years from now on Nostr, one sat is going to be worth more than it is today. And even for somebody trying to spam one sat, that's going to be more difficult. So is Bitcoin enabled value on Nostr kind of the wall that ends up protecting Nostr from a lot of that shit?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm really interested in like these email solutions, because my email inbox is a complete disaster and it's filled with spam. And so I'm like, well, if we just had zaps, if I just had like use just zaps to prioritize certain messages, right? And I imagine spam and like fake accounts and AI bots are going to start slowly take over. And our only defense against that is real, like things you can't create for free. Like, what are things you can't create for free on the internet? Well, we have something called Bitcoin and Sats. So it makes a lot of sense that we will start to use that for filtering. That maybe not even just filtering, but like ranking content. Like maybe the stuff that goes to the top of your feed is the paid stuff, and at the very bottom is spam and garbage. So by the time you scroll down, you're like, well, there's nothing worth down here. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are sending messages for free will get caught in the bottom, but that's just because that's just going to be the reality. Is that if spam gets that bad, then we'll need to rely on Sats more. So
I mean, and at least it's built in really as it's a nip,
yeah,
right? It's already out there, and I think that's a powerful thing. One other thing, I want to be conscious of your scarce time in this world, but just a couple other things I wanted to just tap on before we close out. One is just, I'd love to get your thoughts just on the wallet of Satoshi news in the US. And then also UTXO announced that Nodeless was getting hit with some money transmitter shit up in Canada. So just, do you see more of that type of enforcement coming down the pipe for, let's say, for Nostr clients? Like, are the regulators going to turn their sights to Nostr because of Zaps? And because that's, our clients going to be charged with money transmitter, violations. Is that something that you're thinking about at this time, or is that they're still not paying attention enough?
I mean, I can never underestimate how stupid they are. So I'm sure they will try to pull shit like that. We're like, oh yeah, you're transmitting money in Damus, which is like not even technically true. You're using another app to transmit the money. So they should be going after those apps first. This is why it's important that we should be focusing on non-custodial solutions. And that's one of the biggest criticisms of the Zap spec is that it kind of makes it harder to do non-custodial. But I feel like once people, if they start pulling this shit more and more, and people start getting cracked down more and more, like that's the point where I'm like, well, maybe we'll need to revise the Zap spec to make it easier to do non-custodial, like get rid of the Ellen euro requirement, which is something I've always talked about. I mean, I'm using this KYC exchange in Canada called ShakePay, and even now I'm like, well, I'm going to ditch that now, because if they're going to start coming after me, then for running a Lightning node, I wouldn't be surprised if they start coming after people just like running Lightning nodes, right? And I use the Damus Lightning node to like do our merch sales and basically do all the commerce for at Damus. So who knows? Like it's crazy world out there.
It's sad that we're at that state where, I mean, and perhaps this is just always the case for new technologies that come about. It's just happening at a much higher rate now because of the information age that we live in. But when you see countries like the United States and like Canada just decide to absolutely stomp on good tech because they don't like the people that are operating it, because those people chose not to jump through all of their hoops. And it's all like, it all comes down to just protecting from money laundering and terrorist financing and stuff that is never even being done at any meaningful scale through these, Bitcoin enabled solutions, certainly not even close to the scale that it is through the traditional banking system. So it grinds my gears, Will. It really does. And it's sad to see like people providing great services, like, cause people may have problems with Wallet of Satoshi for being custodial, but that is a great service that they were providing in the US. And now it's like, I'm going to keep this phone forever. I won't be able to update the app, but hopefully I'll still be able to use it through a VPN if they aren't letting traffic at all through the US. But it's sad to see that. Like, that's people getting cut off from a really valuable service. And I don't know. It's a bummer.
It's like, they always say, oh, terrorism. Like, what is terrorism? Like maybe the actual terrorism is them like completely sucking all of the energy out of our money and deflating our currency and causing people where they can't even pay their bills. Like that causes real terror in the world. And who are the terrorists? Is like the people who are diluting our money supply. So don't be mad at us because we're just going to a different solution that actually fucking works and we're not being robbed every day. So we're the terrorists? No, you guys are the fucking terrorists, and we're just trying to protect our money from you psychopaths. So fuck them. Like if they eventually come after me, I'm probably gonna leave the country and go find somewhere in El Salvador or something, because I don't know. The states are failing, I think, and they're scrambling to grab as much money as they can before the whole system collapses. That's what it feels like.
Amen. And it is fucking sad. Like, you genuinely think about the damage that inflation does to people. Like, not just like the little things like, oh, your groceries are more expensive. Like, when economies collapse, and even when like, just when you go into a recession, even the fucking government statistics will show you that more people die because more people commit
Mm-hmm.
suicide, or more people get sick and don't get care. This is actual harm, material harm, being caused by them just being corrupt, irresponsible fucks. And it's fucking sad. And then, as you said, to turn around and try to push the blame onto people building open source projects or closed source projects that simply don't follow all their rules.
We're
It's
literally
fucking
building
sad
like
to
the
see.
life rafts to get away from their broken system, and they're just fucking trying to pop them with knives. Like, what the? It's just like, do something better with your lives instead of cause more misery for people just trying to survive and to build life rafts from the chaos that you've ensued. So it's just like the people who are engaged in that type of stuff is just like bottom of the barrel. Like, just very disappointing that there's people on this planet who don't see what's going on, and maybe they are just like, they just feel like they're just doing their job and they don't really know what's the bigger picture. But it's yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has showed us the light, and this is the only path forward, and that's why I've been dedicating most of my life, just building on Bitcoin, building on Bitcoin adjacent tech, and it's just the most important thing for humanity right now. And it's really sad that a majority of the world still sees it as like a scam, or not as important it is, but it is the most important technology that that I work on, and that at this point in time, I think so.
That is a really nice note to start to close out on, because I don't know how to quite follow that. I do want to say, though, I'm so grateful to people like yourself, Will, who are doing the actual building on these protocols like Bitcoin and Nostr, because these two things give me so much hope in the future at a time when we are just bombarded with the negativity of the fiat world and of the negative consequences that the fiat world has brought upon us. I think I speak for a lot of our fellow plebs when I say I would be in a pretty dark place if I didn't have the hope that Bitcoin brings me for the future, because it really is this, it's a light in the darkness, and it's something that actually gives me a little bit of faith in humanity's potential again. And I think the more people that get that hope and get a little bit of that faith in what we can accomplish together in a very decentralized way, the better off we're going to be. The last thing I'll end on, Will, is, are you reading anything right now that you would recommend besides notes on Nostr? I don't know how much time you have for the written word on the page between building and zapping and everything else, but
It's for some reason I'm reading something called it's like Skunkworks by Ben Rich, the guy who runs Lockheed Martin. It for some reason,
interesting.
because I went down this like rabbit hole of after the David Grush interview with Joe Rogan about like UFOs. I'm just like, is this real? Like, is this actually happening, or is this just another fucking psyop? So I was just like really digging deep into, what are the competent parts of the U.S. government, and like what were they capable of during the times where all this shit was going down. And it is pretty impressive. So a lot of times we talk about like the government's incompetent, but there are very small teams within the government who are like really, really good. And Lockheed Martin was one of those examples who built like the spy planes in the 50s and stuff. So I just find that fascinating about, and now it makes me wonder. It's like, what do the competent teams know about Bitcoin and Nostr, and like, are they doing something about it, and they're just not telling anyone? Anyway, so that's always fascinating to me, like kind of like the black projects and stuff. So anyway, this is a random thing I'm reading, but I just find it kind of cool.
No, you said it's called
Skunkworks.
Skunkworks. I'll have to check that out. That it's a little bit of a terrifying prospect that there are competent parts of the government, but what can you do, I guess. But Will, I want to thank you for sharing your scarce time with me here today. Like Bitcoin, your time is very scarce. You spend the vast majority of it building, and for that, I thank you. And thank you to everyone else out there who will listen to this later. for sharing your scarce time with us. So, Will, thank you so much. I'm going to go and note about this right now. Maybe I'll post a picture of my feet. Maybe I won't. We'll have to see. But thanks so much for all you do. And thanks for joining me.
This was awesome. Cheers.
Cheers. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net or hit me up on social media. On Nostr, head to primal.net/Walker. And on Twitter, search for @WalkerAmerica or @TitcoinPodcast. You can also watch the video version of this show on X or on YouTube by going to youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica or Rumble by searching for @WalkerAmerica. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million. But Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.